be reading from our Haggadah about Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon sitting around a table in what city? Anybody remember? Well, that means you're not in Bnei Brak. And why do I mention them now? Because Bnei Brak has been in the news over the last week for a couple of different reasons. A few days ago, one of the ongoing protests actually took place in Bnei Brak, and it made it to the news for two reasons. Some of the residents of Bnei Brak, who are known to be more open to others, came downstairs and were offering refreshments. And you saw that in the news. And people were taking the refreshments. Also, you saw a man who suddenly heard music and singing that was being played. And so the music and the singing that was being played in Bnei Brak was Zmirot, it wasn't Shabbat, but of that nature, and it was a Shalom Aleichem. And you see this non-observant protester coming to tears. So that was one reason Bnei Brak was on the news. It is today a year since the terrorist attack in Bnei Brak. You remember there was a week that there was a series of shootings in the Tel Aviv area. And Rav Yechezkel, Ovadia Yechezkel, was on TV today. He lost his brother in that attack, Avishai Yechezkel. And he was being interviewed because they are renaming a street in Bnei Brak in honor of the non-Jewish policeman who was killed when he tried to protect other people from the shooter. Now, what makes this particularly poignant is that all the streets in Bnei Brak are named after rabbis. And when you listen to Rav Ovadia Yechezkel, he says, doesn't matter what religion he is. He's a gibor. He's a hero. And for him, he belongs next to our rabbis. So Shoter Amir Hori will be honored and remembered. And that is something to be very proud of from the Bnei Brak community. You might recall last year we read the Israeli poet's Amnon Rivik suggestion that each one of us needs his or her own Mitzrayim, Egypt, from which to pull out him or herself. And we certainly repeat that year after year when we say, Bechol dor vador, in every generation, it is our duty to see himself as though he had personally come out from Egypt. You shall tell your son, your daughter on that day, it was because of this that the Lord did all these miracles for me when I went out of Egypt. Not only our fathers, did the Holy One, blessed be he, redeem from Egypt, but he redeemed us with them as well. It occurs to me that we don't perhaps take enough time to talk about in depth our trek in the Midbar, in the wilderness. Now note that I said my and our, parallel to what I just read. We know how essential it is when we're telling this story to anyone, and in particular the younger generations, that if we want them to be captivated, we have to tell them that this is something that's important to me when I left Mitzrayim. And then the next step is that I feel a part of them, the collective. And in that same way, I was therefore part of the journey, the long journey in the Midbar. Allow me to suggest that each of us also needs her or his own wilderness. Now, let me ask you, what do you think I mean by that? I'm going to ask this in 3 different ways, and I'm looking for a response. I'll say that again. Each of us needs not just his own Egypt, which we discussed last year, and I'm sure you remember every word we said, but we also need our own wilderness. What do you think I mean by that? What image of wilderness do you assume I have? Or what image do you have of the wilderness?
I'm thinking of wandering sort of blindly and sort of not knowing where I'm going.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Someone else.
Wilderness is the path that we took from Egypt to Israel. So I think in one way it could be the path that we take, whatever is troubling us, how we get to the solution, that wilderness is our path, however that is.
Bracha, I'm also thinking about the travels through the wilderness, and the path we take is any new learning that we take on. Any new learning is also going from an unknown wilderness to knowledge.
Yeah, in the same way that we said last year, that each of us currently has ongoing Egypts and contemporary Egypts that we have today, wildernesses that we go through. Yes, thank you, Tzipora, Michael. Anyone else?
Bracha, I see it in a different way, because I'm getting a visual image of wilderness. And to me, it's wide open space. It's being a place where I can be alone with nature, and probably has a very, if I know where I'm going, if I thought I was lost, I might be a little upset, but it's a place that could have a very calming effect on me.
Okay, good. We're having a variety of answers.
Yeah, I see it as a personal struggles, because really, I just lost my father last year. It's almost a year. And, you know, like grieving, for instance, is, you know, other people have gone through it, but you have your own way of dealing with it. You feel very alone in your own wilderness. And I think any struggle, mental health or any, you know, everyone, we all have our own struggles. And I think, you know, we can be redeemed. You know, we're trying to be free from that, find our path to be free.
I look at it as when
we all have a time where we don't know what to do or where to walk. And it's up to us to make a decision. You go right or you go left out of the wilderness. So to me, it's a time of conscious decision making.
Yeah. Again, two answers. Wonderful.
I
Anyone
don't think,
else?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's mentioned also wilderness could be that point where you're questioning your faith or you have a loss of faith.
Good, Brenda. Yeah.
I think it's also a time when you're potentially subsumed by society, general society, and lose your connections to Jewish values, perhaps.
Interesting answer. Okay. Good. Anyone else? All right, we'll see how these images might come up as we continue. Let me share the screen. Okay. So you might find this interesting. Make that bigger. Some actually perceive a vacation as a type of wilderness, reflecting the wilderness of the Torah. Philosopher Alain de Botton writes the following: we may find ourselves reverting to a more childish, picture yourselves on vacation and why you might go on that vacation. We might find ourselves reverting to a more childish, less independent self. We may regress emotionally or question who we are existentially. Alternatively, this very questioning may bring about necessary character changes and open up new vistas. We may feel energized and invigorated in a foreign landscape, or feel enervated and out of sorts. We've heard this just now. This transformation often begins with the body and travels to the soul. Our eating and sleeping are not the same. We may find the weather conditions physically challenging or a welcome change. We know that the travel experience, which is often for vacation, is supposed to help us rest and recoup. Yet often the change in our surroundings exhausts us, even when we have voluntarily chosen to travel. Now, you might say, a vacation is not following enslavement. But what do you say to what I just said? Tzipora, a moment ago, said that the wilderness can be contemporary. So sometimes when we go on that vacation, aren't we leaving for a few days or a few weeks or perhaps a month? Some type of enslavement? Can anybody see how this might relate? And this is taken from a book about Sefer Bamidbar. The biblical scholar and educator Erica Brown brings these thoughts in her text. What is she conceiving as the experience in the Midbar? Does it sound like a positive experience? And I want to say up front, very often we hear Why did they have to spend such a long time in the wilderness? That it was a punishment? I can't buy that. For so long? No. That's a cop-out. Maybe a few days. But there's got to be so much more if it's that long.
I think that struggle makes us strong. I think that struggle makes us strong.
Okay. Character building. Anyone else want to comment about this image that's created here in the art of travel?
They actually had to adapt to a new life. And just as when you go on vacation, it usually takes you a day or so to really adapt to your new surroundings and begin to really, really enjoy them. We aren't coming from the same kind of slavery as they were. Mm-hmm. They had been enslaved for hundreds of years. We're escaping from a job and a routine that certainly is maybe onerous, but not as onerous as what they had encountered. And yet we still need those couple of days of adaptation. So it took them a longer time.
Okay, good. Yeah.
It's interesting the way the author, she points out something I think we all know, and that is we look forward to our vacations, we go on them, we come back, and then we say, that was great, but boy, am I tired. Boy, am I exhausted. But it was still great. So even though it's exhausting, you're still very happy that you went on it. And I think it's a common thing. I feel it, and I hear many of my friends who go on vacations feel the same thing. It's exhausting, but we're glad we did it.
But I think it's part of our journey in life.
Yes. No, I think that comes through here. And how often are we on a vacation and we say when we get back to the city, we're going to make sure we don't do that or we do that.
Mm-hmm. Having just returned from Florida, back to this less than pleasant weather, I want to go back. You know, I say it somewhat facetiously, but it depends how you take on that wilderness, that difference where you live.
Absolutely.
If you attach yourself to community, to synagogue, to friends, it's enervating. It's phenomenal. It's a thing. If you do it a different way, and it's, you know, I'm going to follow this prescribed, challenging itinerary, you know, blindly or rigidly.
Speaking.
Perhaps not.
I think a changing is very important.
Yeah. So the other thing is that you know, we don't know, you know, 40 days is a lot different than 40 years. And the 40 years is really a metamorphosis of a society. You know, it's changing from slave mentality to freedom mentality. And that is a substantial difference. I don't think we understand that. You know, we say, picture yourself here, you left that, you know, but it's hard to understand a slave.
Sure. Yeah.
Really difficult.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. So in the final Parsha of Bamidbar, Parshat Maseh, there are 42 stations, journeys,
yes,
that are enumerated. What's the meaning behind such a list? So in text number 2, the 42 journeys of the Israelites are to be found in every person, you and me, from the day of his or her birth until death, the Baal Shem Tov says. Each individual's birth should be understood within the context of the Exodus from Egypt, whatever Egypt, and the subsequent stages of life are journeys that lead from place to place. Now, in the biblical wilderness, the overall situation was complex. As your initial answers indicated, there were different images. On the one hand, they were free now, even though, of course, they still had a slave mentality, but they weren't self-determining. They were complaining, but they were desperate for sustenance. And when they had it without doing anything, sometimes they were grateful, sometimes they weren't. At first, their complaints were justified and understandable. They were just looking for the basics. But in time, they were craving for the luxurious. And that's when things started to deteriorate. Now, I'd like to break down the Israelites' experience in the Midbar into 4 parts. And what was their experience? So, experience type 1. Was it a destination or a process? And somebody earlier, maybe Esther, said that it's not just the arrival, but it's the journey, getting there, and the details. And I'm sure we all can remember trips that we've taken that getting there might even be more interesting, fun, than the actual arrival. So there's a midrash that says, Am Yisrael were very much in process in the wilderness at this delicate stage of their infancy. And the wilderness afforded them the opportunity of growth and development spiritually, culturally, civilly, in order to enter the land of Israel in a more mature state. So somebody in our class thinks very much like this Mechilta, who said they weren't ready and needed to be prepared because, in fact, they had quite a challenge ahead of them because it was not going to be all done by God. He wanted them as partners. So it was a process, and it was a process that was going to take a long time.
It gave them the ability to cope,
which they did not have coping abilities at this point. Experience type number 2, which I've already alluded to. Was it a simple time, singular, or was it varied, even perhaps contradictions within this time? So this is a poem. There's a British woman who has a wonderful book of Parsha poems. And she writes the following: 42 places of wonders and dailiness, terror and love, affliction and healing, ingratitude and grace, obstinacy and generosity, misdeeds and regret, grumbling and contentment, discord and peace, sanctity and baseness, rejoicing and tears, intimacy and alienation, duty and neglect, anger and compassion, sin and reprieve, ardor and disappointment, rupture and goodwill, outbursts and silence, regression and growth, birth and death, darkness and light, descent and ascent, wandering fitfully, yet at last coming home.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, and it says it all. And when Brenda a few minutes ago said that nobody had talked about them losing faith, it went back and forth. And we won't get into it today.
I think it's the message.
Sorry, please mute yourself. That an entire topic is what would evoke faith. It certainly wasn't miracles, because maybe they were grateful for a miracle like Kriyat Yam Suf, the Reed Sea, but that lasted for a mere few minutes. So that's a whole other topic. But it was more of a need to believe, but it didn't last. And when I say that it deteriorated, when they craved for luxuries and delicacies, that's when it gets scary. When they want or become consumed with material. And we'll get to that when we see why other things happened in the desert. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay.
What comes to mind is making lemonade out of lemon.
Yeah. Okay. True. I think that gets back to what Morley said a few minutes ago. So this poem captures the dualisms of the time in the Midbar. And that's also a reality of life. How long does one clear-cut mood last, unfortunately? Okay. Now, this next text, just one pasuk, echoes this perspective. In Bamidbar, they journeyed from Marah, a place which means bitter, and arrived in Elim. And in Elim, there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. So what do we have here? It's a transition, but it's much more than that. It's a juxtaposition of what? Similar to the poem that we just read.
The bad and
the Topper.
The bad and the good.
The bitter and the sweet. Ala dvash v'ala oketz. Exactly. And the juxtaposition, very poignant, very poignant. And now another contrast by Rabbanit Tikonchiks. Very interesting. Follow along. This is a debate from the Jerusalem Talmud about the experience, how people felt about the experience in the desert. Did they feel that things were permanent or temporary? According to Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Bun, life in the desert always felt temporary for the people of Israel. This was not due to the fact that they would occasionally have to pack up and switch camps. Rather, it was based on their awareness that the desert was not their final destination. The people knew that they would eventually settle in Israel. And this knowledge made the journey through the desert feel like traveling through a long hallway, and the camps in the desert feel like rest stops along the way. On a deeper level, it seems that it was not the temporary nature of each individual encampment that made life so difficult, but rather the knowledge that the entire enterprise was transient.
Well,
so what's the difficulty there?
Wasn't permanent.
I'm sorry?
Knowing that what they are going through is not the final thing.
Okay, that people find it hard to be in a situation that is transient.
But wasn't the Mishkan to help them with that? Because the Mishkan had to travel from place to place.
Yeah, sure. But, you know, would that, it's something tangible, but I don't know how long that would work for me. I don't know. I don't know. Okay, so that's one. On the other hand, Rabbi Yassa believes that there is nothing more permanent than that which is temporary. The fact that their own judgment was immaterial and they were traveling and camping according to divine commands made the experience like something that was permanent, eternal. Now that's a little different than what you said, Esther, about the Mishkan, because here it's saying right out, they were relying on God's eternal commands. In the Talmud Bavli, a similar idea is brought by Rava, who describes the subjective experience that was created by the people's utter dependence on the divine command. Rava said to him, "You said the flags of the desert, since it says concerning them, according to God they shall travel, and according to God they shall camp. For them it was like something that was permanent." Contrary to what we have seen until this point, Rabbi Yassa asserts that the people experienced a sense of permanence when they traveled through the desert. The people settled in each place until further notice. So even though that further notice could come after a day or a year, it didn't matter. Anytime they received the instruction to camp, they settled in as if their stay would be permanent. Now, this is a perspective on life, two different perspectives on life.
It's the ability to make the best of any situation.
Bracha.
I don't know if it's just that. Tzipora?
I am just thinking the physicalness of having to move and settle and move and settle is one aspect. But if they're surrounded by their family, that should give a sense of permanence outside of the physical traveling and packing and unpacking and camping and not camping. But if they have their loved ones around them, then it shouldn't matter. One would hope or think.
That should be comforting. If you have everyone that you love around you, that should be a big help.
That's my point.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to respond?
Well, the thing that bothers me about this is through this entire wilderness experience is a total dependence, physical, material dependence on survival with God. And it's kind of the unanswered question in my mind. Okay, yeah, we're getting from slave to freedom, but at the same time, there's no sense of how are you going to provide for yourself?
Yeah. At this point, they can't.
It reminds me of the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who said the only constant in life is change.
Mm-hmm.
I think what makes this complicated is, on the one hand, because I know what you're getting at, Morley, and if he's looking to prepare them to be able to take over this new project of building this country, they have to have the physical means and abilities to do that. On the other hand, he's also intent and determined to make them be believers in him. Now, are they going to believe in him more if he gives to them everything they need? We don't have to answer that here, but it's a good question. And we know the answer, no. You know, the more he gives, they don't necessarily say yes, and we are going to believe in you because you just give and give. In fact, you know, a line that we say on Rosh Hashanah from Yirmiyahu, that God remembers what they were like when they were young and followed him into the Midbar, Chesed Nurayach, and then they leave that.
Magia li.
Well, no, it's an important question. Yep. Because we absolutely know that God wants them to build on their own together with him. We know that. We know that. Okay. Much to think about. Okay. Experience type number 3. Character building. So this Erica Brown that I've mentioned before and earlier today, and I think Marlene alluded to this, in a place stripped bare of luxury, human beings found their essential selves. What matters most can only be truly discovered where there are few distractions. And educator Amichai Levy elaborates on that. The rabbis, driven by their search for meaning in every aspect of the text, cannot see this, being in the Midbar, the wilderness, as just background, just as the setting for the narrative. For them, the setting has purpose. The choice of the wilderness as the place of revelation, loaded with symbolic meanings, a source of teaching, defining of who we are. Kol mi she'eno oseh atzmo k'midbar hefker, eino yachol liknot et ha'chochma v'torah. They tell us in Midrash Numbers Rabbah, anyone who does not make themselves open like a wilderness cannot acquire wisdom and Torah. The setting of the interaction with God is itself, the rabbis argue, critical. The wilderness is the point, for without the wilderness, revelation cannot take place. Acquiring wisdom, acquiring Torah, requires wilderness within us. What does this mean? The rabbis demand a level of humility, of openness, of rawness, like the wild, of dependence, for with these come the ability to learn from others. In a few days, again, the paragraph in the Haggadah that says, even if you're a chacham, you have to study, you have to repeat, you have to. And in order for a chacham to be willing to again study something, you have to be humble. And no matter how much we know, until 120, we should be open to learning and listening to another. I've been saying that a lot this week. Where did I go? Okay. The acquisition of wisdom requires us to make ourselves like the wilderness, to remove our sense of self-importance, our pre-existing assumptions, to strip ourselves back, to ask what is important. The Kotzker Rebbe, a Hasidic leader of the 19th century, put it like this: only a person who is willing to make nothing of himself, I don't know if we have to go nothing, but who thinks of himself as a desert, is truly worthy of having the divine presence rest on him and of attaining the true light of the Torah. This message is parallel in a midrash, a piece of rabbinic imagination about the specific choice of Sinai as the mountain for revelation. According to this midrash, I'm sure you're familiar with this, when God sought to give the Torah to Israel, the mountains all clamored to be chosen, each explaining why they were the best or most important. God rejected them all, explaining that why they were the best or most important. God rejected them all, explaining that they had disqualified themselves as a result of their arrogance. Thus, God chose instead Mount Sinai, which had remained quiet, characterized by its humility.
Yeah.
And now, experience type 4. Humanizing through numbering. So we have Sefer Bamidbar, which means the book in the wilderness. But in English, you know, it's translated the book of Numbers. So what's that all about? So the book begins, take the sum, and interesting in the Hebrew, Se'u et Rosh. How does it say in Hebrew? Take the sum, count, lift the head, and you'll see why that's important. Take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel by families, following their fathers' houses, a head count of every male according to the number of their names. Now, very, very interesting. Also important to the experience in the Midbar is that each person who is now no longer a slave feels important, because we know the other extreme is what they experienced in Egypt. And so, Jonathan Kligler says the following: the wanderings of the children of Israel in the wilderness are a spiritual journey from the dehumanized, fragmented condition of slavery to the restoration of our full humanity. Torah commentators understand God's desire that we be accurately counted as a sign of love. Commenting on our verse, the medieval commentator Rashi explains that because they were dear to God, God counted them often. God is here a teacher with, her class on a school trip, constantly counting to make sure no one gets left behind. God is a loving parent, gazing repeatedly at each of his children until they complain, "Why do you keep looking at me?" This is the thrust of the midrashic understanding of why God wants to count us over and over. God counts us because of love, and we are not just numbers. Our verse says, Su'u et Rosh kol adat b'nei Israel, which literally means lift up the head of every person in the community. That is to say, take account of them one by one, every single individual. If you are counted, then you count. You matter. Sounds corny, but it's true. To God, every single person matters. With this understanding, the opening of the book of Numbers offers a stark contrast to the opening of the book of Exodus, which is Shemot, Shemot. Exodus' Hebrew name is Sefer Shemot, the book of names. Shemot opens by describing the degradation of the children of Israel under the rule of Pharaoh. The title Shemot can be read as ironic, as Pharaoh thinks of, describes, and reduces the children of Israel to a nameless swarm. Pharaoh takes away their names, and they become interchangeable cogs in his designs. The process and desired result of liberation is a society in which no one is reduced to an interchangeable number, but rather a society in which everyone counts and is accounted for. The book of Numbers begins with a people now free from forced bondage, and the Creator wants every single one of them to lift their head proudly, to let their face be seen in its utter uniqueness, and to know that they are equally worthy of love as any other child of God. The journey to the promised land is the journey toward a society in which we all remember that everyone counts. Rabbi Jonathan Fligler. Zipporah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I know. I'm just thinking of the numbers on arms. Just that we.
Yes, and actually, there's a section that I didn't bring here where he alludes to that he has that image. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else about anything we have brought forth here thus far?
Reminds me of the joy everybody gets that they have a chance to vote. Every person counts.
Except if you live in America.
Which wasn't always a given.
No, present tense isn't always a given.
No. Yeah. So some thoughts for the upcoming fast approaching holiday. Now, something else that comes up in this parsha of Midbar. The children of Israel shall encamp each man by his division with the flagstaffs of their father's house, some distance from the tent of meeting they shall encamp. Now, tell me what you notice in this diagram.
Well, it's
you see what's in the middle? Is it clear enough? The word?
The Mishkan is close enough to all the tribes.
Okay. It's funny that you said it's close enough. What else? How else could you describe it? The Mishkan, the tabernacle is?
The center.
It's common center. Okay. What else can you say about each tribe?
It's an interesting grouping of tribes.
Okay. What else visually? Somebody?
All different colors.
All different colors. Okay. Why?
Because
This
each
isn't
tribe is
particularly pretty, but
each tribe has their own, I guess, their own color or their own
banner.
Characters.
Each one was told to have their own banner.
But it also points out that they have their own identity.
Absolutely. Now,
There's also division, I think, according to their mothers.
No,
because you've got on the west, you've got Benjamin, Manasseh, and Ephraim, who were Rachel's, Joseph and his brother.
Okay. Good.
One thing I can't help but notice, if I was a Christian, I'd say, oh, the sign.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I was thinking. I didn't want to say it out loud.
Is that the way it was?
Now, what does that say? That I didn't even take note of that. Interesting.
The reason I said this, and it's really interesting, when I was in grade 6, we had a missionary as a supply teacher. She used to read us from the Old Testament, our Torah, a small section every morning with her own little twist. And one of the things I'll never forget, I was in grade 6, so 10 years old. She said, there was a big plague and Aaron held up a snake on a stick in the sign of the cross, telling the Jewish people that Jesus will be coming. So that never left my head.
I guess not.
And when I looked at this, I'm thinking, whoa, she'd be really happy to see that.
Michael?
Yeah.
May I speak?
Sure.
Yeah. I thank you very much, Michael. I was going to say exactly what you said, but I was afraid to.
Yeah.
But you put another couple of those blocks underneath, and you've got yourself a real cross. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, I'm taking it off the.
Take it off here.
Okay, now let me tell you my real reason for bringing that as our last topic. I think the Parsha gives a very, very important message and very related to Pesach and our times and what our last text was suggesting. Each of us has our own identity, and that is to be respected as long as there's nothing evil that's happening. And life would be very boring if people didn't have different opinions. I wouldn't mind if it was a little boring. But everybody is meant to have their own banners without being judged, as long as things stay safe. Allow me to pause. But the banners are never to forget the centralizing, organizing principle of that tabernacle. And that's what holds everybody together. So whatever side you're on, and I will not say what side I'm on, because it doesn't matter now, because this is a message for every side. Our commitment has to be to God's original hope and mission for our people. Even if it is a far way from where he wants it to be. So that when people start saying, well, maybe I won't go to reserve duty as protest, that's just being part of the me generation. That fifth cup of wine that we put out on the table represents Veheveti, that my ultimate goal was to bring people to this country, which is a laboratory for creating the possibility of putting into effect morality, and it won't be easy. Sometimes it's better and sometimes it's not. But it's easy to be perfect when you don't have to deal with realities. And nobody's saying that we're happy with what's going on here, no. But when I hear that there are people in North America and maybe in other continents saying to their congregants, and I'm not talking specifically even about Toronto. I've been talking to some Americans. I don't know that you should go visit Israel now. People, in a few days, we'll be also reading from the Haggadah that we start with Gnut and go to Shevach. We tell the whole story. We go from degradation, that we were slaves or that we were idol worshipers, and then we talk about the triumphs. And when we tell this story, please God, in 20 years, we'll have to tell about this horrific period because we talked about the good and the bad, because that's life. And you don't say goodbye to a child who's being difficult. That's not what unconditional love is.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I was on Derech Beit Lechem. You might remember, some of you, 4.5 years ago, when I was here for my first Pesach, and I shared with you that I spent over 800 shekels on a roast. Anybody remember that?
No.
So I went to pick up my what I had ordered from the butcher yesterday. And I am pleased to tell you that my whole order for the week was less than that roast, almost the week. Anyway, that's just an aside. But when I came out of this butcher, I bumped into, you know, also how for around 12 years, Batya and I would go down to Atlanta, Georgia for Pesach. Mm-hmm. So my friend there, her son and his girlfriend have been here for the year. He's stupidly studying to become a rabbi. And and he has the option of staying for another year. And he's a kind of spiritual guy, and I would think of him as left. And I knew that they were thinking about whether they'll stay a second year. And God bless him, Benny. He said, we've decided we're staying because this is not the time to leave. What can I tell you? I share this with you because I know who you are. And I don't want you to think I was just shying away. And I'm not talking politics, I'm talking Ahavat Yisrael. Yeah. And of course, we have to pray for wisdom and that our leaders, it's a terrible thing. Just a terrible thing. Not trusting, because when I say to Nechama, you know, I just pray both sides now are sincere, and we look at each other and say, yeah, you know, what does that mean? You know, and people we think of who we say should go into politics, they won't because they're scared they'll become corrupt. But I'm going to tell you something touching to end with. You remember Todd Sohn, Gershon Sheila's, who lives in Renana for many years? He wrote me a few days ago and said, you know, it's at times like this when I'm not sure of what to think that I wish your dad was here. And he asked few questions. Can you try to help? What do you think he would say? What would he say about this? And that was touching. So we have our touching moments.
Yeah. Bracha?
Yes.
I was thinking when you said about being individual, I remember the part in the Haggadah when he talks about the 4 sons, and the language changes to the feminine when it comes to the child that doesn't know how to ask. And I remember the explanation I got is that if a person is blind, we feel sorry for them or handicapped, but when a person is not mentally challenged, we tend to laugh it off and therefore treat him as a mother would treat a child.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That's interesting. Yesterday, my niece, David's eldest daughter, organized a beautiful event in raising money for Shalva. Shalva is a wonderful institution here for mentally challenged.
Is it like the RINA in Canada?
Perhaps. And then her older brother, actually posted that when he goes outside now, is going to be wearing a helmet. But not for the reason that you think. It's because my niece, his cousin, just got her license yesterday. Hey, Nechama, aren't you thrilled? I'm trying to end on a happy note.
Bracha?
It's good because we know that we'll have another safe driver on the road. I just hope when the parties now, and I wish they would have done this before,
yes,
to talk, because there does have to be change. You
Sure,
got
I
to
understand
really
that.
find the right things that you have to read to really understand why there was need for this reform
Yes.
long time ago, and it should have been handled differently. But there is definitely need, and let's just make sure L'Shana Ba'ah B'Yerushalayim.
But there is
Amen.
Amen.